Hey folks, in order to understand Beowulf and heroic epic, we've got to get some literary terminology about epics under our belt. Some of this is going to be a review from back when you did the Odyssey freshman year. So Beowulf is a kind of story that we call a heroic epic. And a heroic epic has sort of three parts to the definition. It's a long narrative poem that includes an epic hero and either, I'll italicize that, a battle between good and evil or events of historical significance. That's spelled entirely wrong. There we go. Thank you, autocorrect. So, that's the definition of a heroic epic. Let me go over some of this just to help it make more sense to you. A long narrative poem, when we think of something as being epic, when I say, I ate an epic ice cream cone, like that thing's going to have like 7 scoops on it. Or if it was an epic sandwich, it's going to be like 2 feet long or like this thick and you can barely fit it in your mouth. The definition of epic is larger than life, is better than could possibly happen in real life. And so we call things epic to indicate that. And that goes back to this type of story. Actually, that's where the word comes from. So when we say it's a long poem, it is. Like Beowulf is 3,000 and something lines if you read the whole thing. We're going to read the chopped up version that's in your textbook. They cut out a bunch of bits that are, I guess, non-essential. I don't think all of the bits they cut out are non-essential, and I'll fill you in on the things that you need to know that you miss. But it's a long narrative poem that includes an epic hero. So narrative, when we say narrative, this poem has a narrator because epic poems all come from a time before the written word, back when oral tradition was the way things were said. They include the voice of the storyteller in them. So it's like there's a narrator, there's a voice that's telling the story. It's a poem. Because they come from that oral tradition, they have to include all of those devices, all of those things that make them memorable and easy to remember and say. And so, if you're dealing with the Greek stuff, you're dealing with dactylic hexameter. It's got this meter. It's got rhymes. If you're dealing with the Anglo-Saxon stuff, it's got the caesuras. It's got the kennings. It's definitely got the alliteration that makes it easy to remember. This poem includes an epic hero. I'm going to go over that in a second, so I'm just going to let that be. But you can tell from the word epic hero that the hero is going to be larger than life, just like anything that's epic. And then the final thing that differentiates a heroic epic from other things, either the main character, the protagonist, is fighting a battle between good and evil, or important historical events are taking place. So let me try and make this clear for you as well. So if you read the Odyssey, for example, the Odyssey is the story of Odysseus trying to get home after the Trojan War. There's nothing historically significant going on there. It's just one guy trying to make it home, but he keeps facing these monsters who represent evil. They're not, he's the good guy, they're the evil ones, whether it's Circe, who turns his guys into pigs, or a Cyclops who's eating his guys. You go through, or the suitors who are, breaking all of the rules of society. There are all of these evil forces, and he has to battle those evil forces, and that's what makes it epic. Additionally, you could have the ones that are about historically significant events. For example, before the Odyssey came a story called the Iliad. And the Iliad, there's no clear good or bad side. Like, both sides are good and both sides are bad. The Trojans are defending their homes, and that's good, but they have to defend their homes because Paris stole the wife of King Menelaus of Sparta, and that's bad. And the Greeks are trying to get this wife home, and that's good, but they're all arrogant and sort of jerky, and that's bad. And so, there's no clear good and evil in the Iliad, but the Iliad is about the fall of Troy, which was a city whose second name was Ilium. And so it's about the redrawing of the map of the ancient world. There's a number of other heroic epics. There's one called the Aeneid, which is about the founding of Rome. And they all do one or the other of these things. Beowulf is going to be a battle between good and evil story. So it's not going to be a historically significant events kind of a story. You don't need to worry about that. Then the next one is our epic hero. An epic hero, again, a three-part definition. Sorry about the long definitions, but you've got to know these because they're going to be tested. So take your time and learn these definitions. All the ones that we've done so far, all of these literary terms are going to be on the assessment. An epic hero is a person of high social status with superhuman abilities who represents the values. Wow, I really can't spell today. R-E-P-R-E-S. What did I write it twice? Represents the values of his or her culture. So 3 parts to this epic hero definition as well. When we talk about a person of high social status, it means all of these heroes of these ancient stories will be related to kings, or something like that. The nephews of kings or the sons of kings, they're kings themselves. And the reason for this is very simple. The poets were traveling from town to town, living in the palaces of kings and getting paid by them. And so all of their stories end up being about people of high social status. It's sort of about the power structure that's in place for the power structure that's in place, and that makes sense. So if you look at the Odyssey, it's about this guy, Odysseus, who is the king of Ithaca. And so he's a king himself. If you do the Aeneid, it's about a prince of Troy who goes and founds a city of Rome. So he's a prince. If you read Gilgamesh, it's about the king of a city called Ur, right? Like all of these old stories are about kings and princes. And of course, Beowulf is no different. Beowulf is about a guy who is the nephew of the king of Geatland. That's the main character. He's the epic hero. So he does have high social status. Then these people all have superhuman abilities. They're all better than more powerful than any human could be in some way or another. And you see that with Odysseus. If you remember the scene with the suitors where he's got to string the bow and nobody can string his bow because only somebody as strong as Odysseus could do it, and he manages to do it. But Odysseus' real superpower is his mind. He can outthink anybody. He can outthink the Cyclops. He can outthink Poseidon. He can get out of any situation that he's in. He has these superhuman brains, and they're successful for him. But if you go back to, say, the Iliad, which is the one that came before the Odyssey, the main epic hero in that story is this guy named Achilles. And Achilles was dipped in the river Styx by his mom, and so he's impervious to weapons, and he just runs around raging and killing anybody, and he can't be hurt. So he has superhuman abilities too. And of course, he's a king as well, or the son of a king. And so he's got the high social status also. The last part is that the epic hero has to represent the values of the culture that is being sort of uplifted. And so if you go back to that Wanderer video and you see that Anglo-Saxon code of behavior, the things that the Anglo-Saxons value, you'll see that Beowulf very, very much represents those things. But, if we're going to stick with the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Odyssey was written by the Greeks. Of course they represent him as intelligent. Intelligence is one of their primary attributes. And of course, they also valued strength and physical prowess. I mean, they founded the Olympics. So, that makes sense as well. So Beowulf, let's talk about his superhuman abilities and the values of his culture. Beowulf is super strong. He's got the strength of 30 men. He's also got unlimited swimming abilities. I'm going to introduce that in the next video. So he definitely has abilities that are beyond the scope of a regular human being. And then he represents a lot of the values of his culture. He's loyal to his king. He doesn't brag unless he's going to back it up. He always tells the truth. He never lies. He thinks before he speaks. He does all those things in the Anglo-Saxon code of behavior, but he also represents sort of the great warrior. I mean, this is a warrior culture, and this is the guy who's sort of the pinnacle of warrior abilities. He's enormously strong. He's fearless. He'll do whatever his king asks. He's sort of a poster child of Anglo-Saxon culture. So now we know what a heroic epic is and an epic hero, and Beowulf fits both of these. Another element that you see in nearly every heroic epic ever is what we call divine intervention. It's when God or gods get involved to help characters who believe in them. Right, and you see this all over the Odyssey. Whenever Odysseus is having trouble, what happens? Athena shows up, and she's like, "Oh, Odysseus, I'll turn you into an old man, so the suitors don't recognize you." Right, and so she helps him through these difficult situations, time and time again, and that's what we call divine intervention. Divine being, like God or a being above, coming down and helping people on Earth. And you'll see that in Beowulf as well. This is a very common thing in heroic epics. Now, of course, because Beowulf was written by a Catholic priest, and the intent of it is to, change or convert pagans to Christianity. Obviously, the divine intervention in Beowulf is going to come from God of the Christian tradition, and you can be ready for that and pay attention to that. But divine intervention happens in heroic epics, but you oftentimes also have like a reverse, which I'm not going to put on here, which is sort of like an infernal intervention or a negative intervention by gods to the enemies. So you saw that if you read the Odyssey too, Polyphemus the Cyclops is the son of Poseidon, and he begs Poseidon to ruin Odysseus's life. And of course, then you have this divine intervention, if you will, Poseidon coming down to put roadblocks in Odysseus' way and cause him problems. Similarly, in Beowulf, the monster Grendel has hell-forged hands, and he's related to the first murderer, Cain. And, there's all of these times when Beowulf is going to be pitted against creatures that are too powerful for him because of satanic assistance or whatever reason, and he's going to need divine assistance to sort of balance that out. And that's something that you see in a lot of heroic epics. Next, we've got the quest. Most people know what a quest is. I drive a Quest. It's a van by Nissan. All right, no, that wasn't funny. But a quest is and this is a terrible definition, but you just deal with it, a long, dangerous journey that proves something about the hero. What do you mean something, Mr. Howard? That's pretty vague. True. That is true. It is vague. And that's because quests can do all kinds of things depending on the story that they're in. In the Odyssey, Odysseus is on a quest to try and get home. He just wants to get home and see his family again. And this quest is going to prove his intelligence. It's going to prove his resilience. It's going to prove his strength. It's going to prove all kinds of attributes about him, a number of which are thematic. And the same thing is true in Beowulf, except Beowulf's quest is different. Beowulf is going to Denmark to face this horrible monster Grendel that's terrorizing the country and help an old king. And so he's going on a very different sort of a journey, but it's going to prove the attributes of him that make him a hero, epic hero, but also make him represent the values of his culture. So he's going to show his loyalty. He's going to show his fighting ability and his strength and his courage and, all of these things. But there's a million different quests out there. If you ever watch the Lord of the Rings movies, Frodo and Sam are on a quest to take the ring to Mount Doom. They're essentially like taking Satan's soul to hell to burn, while Satan's searching for them with like the utmost energy, and that of course proves a lot about them and their hearts and their temperaments and shows us that Sam is the true hero. Sorry, Frodo. Right. But there's quests everywhere. Even if Harold and Kumar are going to White Castle, that's a quest, and that's a comic quest. So you can look at lots of different stories and find this sort of quest motif in there. Next, we have what I call the ideal. Now, most people have run into the phrase ideal at some point or another, and usually it's tied with like the ideal man or the ideal woman. And I think that's the easiest way to think about this term and remember what it means. An ideal is an unattainable example of perfection, usually, but not always, in human form. Right? So, when we talk about the ideal man or the ideal woman, this doesn't exist in reality, right? Like we've set our expectations like way up here, and we're looking for this ideal that can't ever be attained in the real world. That's what ideal means. Beowulf is an ideal. Beowulf is not, and most epic heroes are. He's not a character that you can become like. It's impossible to be as strong as he is. It's impossible to be as brave as he is. It's impossible to be Beowulf. But the idea behind an ideal isn't that you become the ideal. That's impossible. It's that you try to become the ideal. And by trying to become the ideal, you elevate yourself, you elevate your abilities. And in the case of Beowulf, which in many ways we'll see as we read it is a roadmap or a formula for how to be a successful Anglo-Saxon warrior, by emulating Beowulf, you earn and learn those traits and you become a better person. And the same thing is true of like the ideal man or the ideal woman. By holding up this example of perfection, theoretically, you get better candidates and you cut out candidates who are worse that you're considering dating. But this is a term that applies specifically to religions as well. Most religions have an ideal. In Christianity, it's Jesus. Like you can't be Jesus. You can't be as forgiving as Jesus or as kind as Jesus or as understanding as Jesus or as wise as Jesus. But by trying to be like him, theoretically, you become a better person and you elevate your morality. Same thing's true for Muhammad. Same thing's true for Buddha. I mean, Buddha really is an ideal. If you could live and be as perfect as Buddha, then you'd achieve nirvana. But you can't, and so all you do is try and elevate yourself and get reincarnated as a better thing. Ideals show up in religion all the time as well. But Beowulf is an ideal. He's not meant to be attainable. He's meant to show as sort of a example of perfection how a Anglo-Saxon warrior should live their life. And I think that helps. Last thing, and then I'm going to shut this video off, is juxtaposition. Juxtaposition is, what did I just do? Okay, here we are. Is really... Why did I do it that way? A fancy word for compare and contrast of two objects or ideas, etc. So, if you're writing an English paper and there's two things inside of a story that are put right next to each other, and they're put that way so the reader can examine the two of them and make comparisons and contrasts, we call this a juxtaposition. This is something that the Beowulf poet does all the time. And I think it's really simple. Like as human beings, we are bilateral. We have bilateral symmetry. We have one side, we have the other side, right? And so we have two eyes, two ears, two hands, 2 feet. And so we'd like to think in pairings. We like to think in binaries. And so, we can hold two things, one in each hand, and we can examine them carefully and we can make, judgments on them. And so I think juxtaposition comes naturally to human beings, but this author is going to do it all the time. And he does it in a way that allows the reader to make judgments. So he'll show you an example of a good king. Good king. Then he'll show you an example of a bad king. Bad king. Good warrior, bad warrior. Good nephew, bad nephew, right? And so you get these series of contrasts between good and bad people and behaviors and ideas. And these contrasts allow you as a reader to have sort of a depth perception on morality. Like we have two eyes, and with the two eyes, we can see depth in the landscape. We can understand where things are in relation to us. And I think the author's idea through using juxtaposition in Beowulf is to give us two perspectives, a positive and a negative perspective. And by having those two poles, then we can see all the grayscale in between, and we can sort of place ourselves on that scale and understand where we belong in the world. And so you'll want to be able to identify the juxtapositions when they happen and talk about them. So heroic epic, epic hero, divine intervention, quest, ideal, juxtaposition, all things we're going to be talking about as we go through Beowulf. All things you want to know, they're all accessible on the assessment at the end, on the summative assessment. So hopefully that was informative. If you have questions, drop them in the feed. I'm happy to answer them. Thanks for your attention.